So thank you all, everyone, for joining us today for our Tag Inspector webinar and InfoTrust webinar on the privacy-focused marketing. We're going to cover and discuss first-party data architecture. Quick little bit of housekeeping here, a few upcoming webinars and events. Hopefully you enjoy our time today, and if so, please join us in the near future. On Thursday, Tyler, who is presenting with me here today, is one of several of our analytics engineers that will be holding an analytics engineering office hour on Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern time. Tune into that if you have any questions around analytics engineering, data collection, architectures, any of those types of items. And yeah, it's a thrilling hour, get some questions answered. Also, to point out, May 10th through the 12th is the Marketing Analytics Summit. Tag Inspector, which is what one of our presenters here today, we will have a session during that summit, as well as a few other speakers internally from InfoTrust that will be talking on some different analytics topics. So check that out, visit the InfoTrust website in order to check out and register for both.
Real quick, Lucas, one thing I'd like to say about the analytics office hours, what we do internally is we prepare a couple of topics for that every week. So even if you don't have specific questions, the goal of that meeting or those office hours really is to peer into the mind of what analytics engineers are thinking right now, and ultimately to have, some interaction from people that have questions. So even if you don't have questions, that's a good thing for you to join.
Amazing. Cool. So on that topic, and since Tyler was just promoting those office hours, our speakers today, myself, I am Lucas Long. I am the Tag Inspector product manager, and then I also do tag management consulting, tag governance consulting for our clients with InfoTrust, really working at that intersection of data and privacy. And then joining with me today is Tyler, and I'll let him introduce himself.
So my name is Tyler Blatt. I've been with InfoTrust for about 6 years, and I've pretty much ran the gambit as far as data. So, I'm an analytics engineer. I'm now more of a cloud architect, so I'm working with the data a little bit further down the line. But I've worked everywhere from data layers to tag management systems to consuming them in platforms to working with those APIs to everything that happens to them in data lakes, visualization, and data science. So I've ran the gambit with data, and I'm here to talk about that whole process and how it fits into privacy and the marketing changes coming.
Amazing. Quick little just context for who we are, and yes, we do know what we're talking about. So Tag Inspector is a tag auditing and monitoring platform. It is a product of InfoTrust. On the InfoTrust side of the house, we do digital analytics consulting work, as Tyler mentioned, really end to end, all the way from the collection architecture through the activation of that data, machine learning, modeling, how you can get the most out of the information that you are collecting. We work with thousands of websites across the globe, and we do a large number of these educational events like those today. So without further ado, let's get into the actual topic here today. Now, one quick note in terms of format. We like to be pretty informal. So Tyler and I will be discussing these topics. If you have any questions or want to chat further on an individual topic, drop it in the Q&A panel. And more than happy to kind of diverge a little bit and dig into the areas that are most interesting for you all. At the end of the day, again, this is an educational webinar, so we want this to provide as much value as possible for everyone joining here. As far as the agenda and what we'll be going through, as mentioned before, topic is around first-party data collection and the architecture within this more privacy-focused marketing world that we're moving into. So first, we'll go through what is that future? What does that privacy-focused future look like? What are the things we need to keep in mind? We'll talk a little bit and kind of put on our future looking glasses and look at what the data architecture of the future looks like. What are some of those key components? We'll really dig into the 4 pillars of that future data collection architecture, what those aspects are. And then we'll talk a little bit more tactically about what are the things that you could be doing today to prepare for that future. At the end, we'll try to get through any remaining questions that are asked, but as mentioned, drop those questions in the question pane as we're going through the content, and we can try to answer those throughout. So Privacy-focused marketing, the winds of change. What are we talking about when we're talking about this really privacy-focused future? What are the things that we're going to be dealing with over the next few years? So the first really key point is consumer trends. Ultimately, any kind of technical changes, any regulatory changes happen because that's what consumers want. So what consumers expect to see from organizations and how they want their data treated and how they want to be respected from a privacy perspective is changing, which means that us as marketers, as advertisers, need to change as well. In addition to those more soft wants and needs and trying to best serve our customers, there are also regulatory changes, so ever increasing regulatory privacy regulations and legislation that is passing. Obviously within Europe, GDPR has been live for several years, and e-privacy even more than that. But more recently within the United States, even seeing CPRA pass back in November for updated regulations within California, and then Virginia passing a new law as recently as last month. In addition to that, we're also dealing with technical paradigm shifts. So the death of cookies, Chrome getting rid of third-party cookies, Safari blocking the ability to access third-party cookies just yesterday, Apple with the ATT update, requiring that explicit consent before being able to access that IDFA. A lot of changes that are happening, all focused on protecting the privacy of users, which for marketers means that we're having to do a little bit more in order to be able to reach the same results.
Let me jump in here for a second, Lucas. Will you jump back one slide?
Yeah.
I think a lot of things people are missing on this one, and I won't go too far into this, but it's something we're saying. When you think about customer trends and what customers expect to see from organizations, people are typically thinking about that from the lens of what are they expecting from Google and Google Analytics? What are they expecting from Apple? Apple clearly doesn't want things being collected. That's why we're seeing Safari on the forefront of shutting things down. I think where a lot of people are missing the boat on this is branding for your company. What is your company collecting? How does that, do you want to be the next Target that got rid of everybody's credit cards got leaked out? Do you want to be the next, when people are saying, what are you collecting? How are you storing this? What is your branding as a company that collects your own data? How do you fit into this puzzle? This is an opportunity for people to brand themselves that we are compliant. We're doing this the right way. It's a chance for you to build that relationship with your customers. So that's at least one angle, and we can jump into that a little bit more when we talk about some of these topics. But I see a lot of people missing the boat and how they can engage that relationship with their customer and build trust with that customer while still collecting data. You can enter that transaction in a responsible way.
For sure. And that plays into that topic of first-party data collection, which we're talking obviously about that architecture here today. For some of those kind of guidelines that you could be using and some of the restrictions and the rules of the game that we're playing within now, some of these changes, just to show here, most of the technical changes, which is what we're looking at on the screen now, have been more recent within the past couple of years, again, as consumers have really introduced those needs and become more aware of what data has been collected, how it's being used. So we have Apple with ITP, Chrome with the cookie announcement, more or less within the next year and a half, that support for third-party cookies going away. And then also additional restrictions that we're seeing with Apple and the ATT, taking away those unique anonymous identifiers for users for purposes of advertising and targeting, even in mobile apps. So everything is really shifting in that direction. When we talk about those technical restrictions and what they are, again, it all revolves around the ability to place and access cookies or cross-site identifiers. So Safari ITP, Firefox ETP, as of today, effectively block third-party cookies, so not usable in that cross-site context. Chrome has announced their intention to phase out support for third-party cookies within the next 2 years. And as of today, there's a few technical requirements for the placement and accessing of those cookies. We're also seeing a rise in the amount and the use and adoption of technical opt-out mechanisms beyond just what browsers are doing. So we have privacy-focused browsers. They're starting to grow a little bit, still very minuscule amount of the market, but we are seeing more users starting to adopt those. You have ad blockers. Some countries here in Europe, where I'm located, numbers are as high as 35 to 45% of users are using some form of an ad blocker. And then we have newer proposals that have been introduced, such as the global privacy control, which plays together with some of those regulatory requirements and provides a universal opt-out mechanism. Still not kind of codified in the law that, yes, that is fully valid and enforced, but we're seeing again that trend. Users using these technical mechanisms in order to opt out of tracking or block tracking from happening of them across different
so I want to jump in here again, Lucas. Just a couple of things that I see on this slide that we're going to talk about the topics that I'm bringing up and later in this, but I want to talk about how you can identify a problem here and how we should be looking at like just this picture, just this slide as a whole, right? Because some people are going to want to hang on to the old world. They're like, well, Chrome's not changing for 2 years, or these things are coming down the road. They look at these initial phases of what they're trying to do, and some people are trying to hang on to that old world. But who wants to be the engineer or the tag system that's managing how all these different platforms are affecting your third-party cookies? And my audience shrank by this much at this date, and this much at this date, and this much at this date. So the time to start understanding the new world is now. So you're seeing enough of them are acting now. Yeah, you can kind of hang on to the old marketing world for, not much longer now, but some amount of time, but the change is coming. And so now's the time to start thinking about this. And this is why we're going to see the first party data stuff we're going to talk about later. And then understanding that really start to ramp up, and a lot of focus in the industry change there, because we're running out of time. And while, yes, some of these changes, as you can see from this slide, are coming, some of them have already happened, and the time to switch is now. So that's something to at least putting this slide together. Another one that I want to talk about is the privacy browsers and what people think they're signing up for. Why are those popular? Why are these privacy browsers getting popular? Why are people turning to Brave and trying to earn, eCoin for browsing? Why are people turning to DuckDuckGo? What are they afraid of? And I've talked to people. We're all in the industry, so we're trying to keep this marketing engine going. But what does the customer think? The customer thinks you're tracking all kinds of things about them that have nothing to do with why you're tracking that data. So that goes a little bit back to branding, and what I was saying earlier, being transparent with your customers that we want to track you because we want to know what deals we want to offer you, what things we want to market out to you, understanding what your branding as a company. Why are we collecting this data? Because there's a huge market misunderstanding on what you're collecting. So this is a chance for you to let your customers understand when they're consenting, what are they consenting for? What do you ultimately, because if I was speaking to my girlfriend about this, and she's like, do I accept these cookies? And I was like, well, do you want that makeup company to keep sending you ads, or would you like to not get ads on that? Ultimately, she doesn't know what she's signing up for. And this is a chance to educate your customers on those types of things. So that's all I have to say about that.
For sure. So these technical restrictions, as Tyler mentioned, getting rid of that ability to track those users across domains. And it really heightens that need for first-party data collection. Now, when we talk about some of these changes as it relates to first-party data collection, some of those concepts that Tyler had mentioned there for providing that information to the users, for earning their trust, for being transparent with the practices, and for limiting your processing of their information to simply those needs or those things that you are disclosing. A lot of that's codified in these legislative updates that have been introduced. So we go back to the cookie laws or the e-privacy directive introduced in Europe back in 2009 for its current iteration, and then a lot more velocity of these different regulations that are being introduced over the last few years. So GDPR going live, passing in 2016, going live in 2018, and then again, as mentioned before, within the past year, we've seen CCPA go live, an update to CCPA, which is the CCPRA, be passed in last November. March 3rd, so just last month, Virginia passed the CDPA, and then we're seeing additional legislation, the e-privacy regulations, again, gaining a little bit of steam, at least in news in Europe. Who knows if that'll ever get done, as well as state by state within the US and some federal legislation being introduced. So these regulatory updates are coming. All of this is really on the heels of those consumer expectations. And what a lot of these things do is they set forth and they provide some guardrails for you and requirements for you to adhere to those consumer expectations, as Tyler was mentioning. So if we think about these regulatory updates and really try to distill them down, what they do is put the onus on you as the organization that's collecting and processing your users' information, and that they're trusting with that information, requiring you to adhere to concepts around privacy by design. So data minimization becoming a really core theme, being intentful about the information that you're collecting, how you're using it, what that impact is on the user, providing full transparency and disclosure to your users, both at the point of collection as well as within your privacy policy and notice, and doing so in a way that makes sense to them so that you can really develop that relationship. These regulations also infer access rights on users. So both the ability for users to directly request information that you have collected from them, and then also the concept of data portability, so that it's easy for them to be able to take that information, understand it, and move it, as well as kind of building on that deletion rights that they have. This really underscores, and something we'll talk about later, the need within your first-party data collection architecture for integration, to be able to really address these different rights and access requests, deletion requests in an efficient way and a cost-effective way for your organization. And then finally, the concept around refusal and objection of processing, additional power and rights afforded to users so they can not consent to your tracking, to the use of cookies, or they can opt out to your processing of their personal data and collection of their personal information. So all of this, again, underscores the need when you're collecting your users' information, having that solid relationship with them, providing them information, as Tyler was mentioning, so that everything makes sense to them and that they can trust you. And that's one of just the foundational components here of any type of first-party data collection moving forward.
I'm gonna jump in here again and maybe zoom out a little bit. And everybody listening today and those listening to the recording, I want you to think as a company, how connected is your data right now that if a user requested to delete itself, could you do that? So one of the things that I did within InfoTrust, I was on a team called Discovery, and we were on the integrations team. We made data talk together. And sometimes there was data that was really hard to reach within that team. We got to get this data connected into a big data lake where all the data is talking together. And some pieces of data are harder than other. You're passing around. If a user were to say, I want data deleted from these platforms, do you understand the ID mapping between all of your platforms and the ability from a single ID or a single user ID or potentially an analytics ID to reach out to all my platforms and delete it? Do you have the underlying data structure and knowledge of your mapping to be able to proceed with these requests? Do you have a governance plan that understands all of the places you're collecting before that to even offer them where you're allowed to delete? Do you have, so when you're looking at these concepts, you should be coming up with the questions of, when this inevitably happens, how ready am I as a company to actually come through with this? I've worked building tools for these very things for some of our partners. We've built tools for deletion from some of these platforms, and sometimes they haven't planned for IDs or specific use cases, and they say, what are we going to do when that user comes through? So these are the types of thoughts, and as we get into first party, where your mind should be on how does this affect me with my company? Am I actually ready to act on this, or do I need to get moving?
Wonderful point. There's downstream effects and there are benefits to a lot of these different concepts as it relates to first-party architecture, beyond simply, I can better use this data for marketing purposes within this new world. It's really a team effort across both marketing as well as compliance. And a lot of these different foundational aspects of the architecture are going to help both teams see a lot of benefits in the future. So we talked about some of those restrictions and some of the kind of headwinds that we're facing as marketers as it relates to this privacy-focused future. And we've really tried to underscore that need for doing right by the consumers, taking their perspective on a lot of these things. So In order to address these challenges, still effectively market to our consumers in a respectful way, and still be able to collect robust information and really integrate that together to action it, what does that architecture of the future really look like? So, the first thing I want to underscore here for the future is, again, getting back to some of those regulatory requirements. The concepts of data minimization and making sure that you're only processing information for purposes in which you've laid out and set out to do so is that the need for strategy and intent. The old concept of let's just collect everything and then we'll figure out what to do with it, we'll extract some value with it down the line, is it's never been a very good strategic decision, but now it also opens you up to regulatory and compliance risk. So the need for marketing and advertising and data strategy is no longer just a best practice. It is a legal requirement within your organization. So you need to think through the ways, the information that you're collecting, what platforms it's going to, how it's being used, and the effects of those activities on your users.
We got a question that came in and a comment. I'll handle the comment real quick, Lucas, and then you can go ahead and read the question and get ready to answer that. Talking about the adoption percentages on that slide, one thing that's really interesting that we've been thinking of as a company that I think you might find interesting is we realize the potential impact, and that's what you're identifying there with those adoption percentages. But one thing that we've been thinking of, so we have a data science team within InfoTrust, and you have this historical trend of all of your behavioral data, of your marketing data, and essentially some of that's going to go blacked out, like where you're going to have holes and voids when this machine inevitably breaks, especially if you are not prepared for a first party data collection and some sort of augmented way of getting that data. So one thing that we've been actually doing is you can actually predict cycles if you have enough data. So in that blacked out period, we're looking at, as part of that machine disappears, how well can we guess how it's still working even though we're not looking under the hood. So as some of this data, so as you start to get sort of black holes in that data, we're looking at modeling and kind of patching that while people are still figuring it out. So we can at least guess at how the machine should be running right now, which I think is a very interesting concept. You want to field that question, Lucas?
Yeah, there's a question in here about recommending cookie consent managers. There's a number of options obviously out there. It really depends upon the organization. We'll follow up directly with you kind of following this on that question with some of those different considerations. But excellent question, and certainly something that is necessary in this kind of future architecture layout. So beyond just strategy and intent, and really thinking through, again, concepts of data minimization, making sure that you know everything that's going on, you're disclosing everything to the users, you're doing right by the consumers. A lot of the chatter that has been happening with how data is being collected and routed in the future is focused on server side. So server side data distribution, which is something that we're going to talk about, but there is still a role to play within the clients. And when we say the clients, we're meaning the browser, the machine itself of the user. And there's a few different core aspects that fundamentals that have been the case in the past that are still going to be the case and become even more important moving into this future. So a few different concepts on the client side center around the data layer, migrating to an event-based data collection model, and then also migrating ultimately to a single stream of information. And Tyler, if you want to maybe kind of break down some of these different components.
Yeah, so when you're looking at like how data has been collected historically, we've kind of just looked at, especially with analytics from the client side, it's been this model where you've kind of had essentially a structure that you had to follow. So like, what is a session? What is a page view? What is a transaction? What are these things? And you kind of run through the rules. And that created sort of chaos because you had to conform to these things. And people realized over time, well, what if I switch platforms? What if I do this? So the first concept being the data layer, this is your central point of events and metadata tied to it. So you have events that are collected and metadata tied to it. And as that comes through, you replay out to a bunch of other tags. And it's just that simple. Well, why does that have to be Why do we have to replay out to other tags when in reality, analytics could also do the same thing? So analytics could take, it doesn't have to have this rigid structure. We can just take in the events and the metadata, and then based off of that information, we can replay out whatever logic we want on top of that. So we can later define what was a transaction, what was a session, what was these things. We collected all the information in an event-based model. So we know all the things that happened, and we can apply our logic on what those things mean later. And if we have that event and that metadata tied to it that came from the data layer, we can basically replay that historically to other platforms. So if we are using this today and this tomorrow, we actually have that historical information. And the single data stream is essentially that, where data is flowing through and being distributed out to multiple places from there. So we're flowing into one place and then distributing out. So we have one stream of data, one centralized place where user ID is always going to be the same user ID. We don't have camel case, uppercase, lowercase. It's all the same. Everything, and the event name is all the same. All this data coming in is the same. And then as we bubble that out to all of other platforms, all the other places, we don't have to deal with what I talked about earlier. Is your data all ready to talk to each other? Is it all ready to communicate with each other? If you have a deletion request, are you ready for that? Well, if you had user ID in that single event stream, and then that user ID played out to all your platforms, yeah, it's all linked. We got user ID, we can delete this person now. But if you don't have these kinds of systems set up to integrate all this data down, have it all being uniform downstream, then you're not going to be able to connect it all and do the things that you need to do. So this is just a client-side style of making sure your data is all uniform and collected in the right way.
Yeah, we'll deep dive in kind of the next section here on some more further specifics on each of these different components. But that core concept of what Tyler is mentioning here of ultimately everything that happens at the collection point happens in order to do something with that information down the line.
Yes.
And really the key here is down the line being able to integrate and then effectively action information across multiple platforms. So the data layer allows you to organize information on the page in a central structure to really organize all that data and make sure you're collecting complete information. That event-based collection model is a shift from that more user-centric or session-focused collection model of the past. And what this allows you to do is collect even minimal amounts of interaction data, even for users that are opting out or not consenting to the collection of any personal information. So central to any association of behavioral information to a user is that user ID. That Tyler is mentioning, either a unique anonymous one or one that identifies the user because of that they've logged in or they've registered with you on the website. When that goes away because the user opts out of your ability to access cookies, or they're saying, no, I don't want to share any personal information with you, this event-based collection model allows you to still at least collect information that, hey, a transaction happened, these products were purchased, or this purchase, or this product was viewed, or this content type was viewed. So it allows you to maintain at least a minimum level of information to help you optimize your websites and to inform some of those downstream actions. And then that single data stream, again, to Tyler's point there, it just unifies all that information so you have one single source of truth, as opposed to today where you have multiple sources of truth being sent to multiple different platforms, and you have to try to wrangle it all together on the back end after the fact. The single data stream allows you, in combination and sitting on top of that data layer, organize everything at the point of collection and then distribute from there. That concept, yeah, go ahead.
There's a question in chat, and I think I can answer this. You can back me up on this, Lucas. So he's asking if event-based collection is still GDPR compliant. It ultimately depends on the relationship to the user, but if you're just collecting that in an anonymous fashion, which is what the point of that is, it is compliant because you're allowed to collect any anonymous data. It's improving your website. It's also the purpose in which you're using the data ultimately is going to get tied back to things like, are you using it to nail down a person and fill out a profile on that person and collect data about them, or is it ultimately about business and increasing the efficiency of your site, understanding transactions and funnels like that? If there's no user tied to it, if it's just this event-based collection, we're just understanding the events without things tied to it, it's generally going to be compliant.
Yeah, there's a lot of, this is a question specific around GDPR. So European laws, there's two things that you need to keep in mind for any European country, Germany being the example here. You have ePrivacy, which speaks to the ability to set or access a cookie. And then you have GDPR, which speaks to your ability to process personal data. So with this event-based collection model, it allows you to collect data without accessing or placing any cookies. So you're not in scope in that sense with those ePrivacy requirements, since you're never accessing the user's device. And then for GDPR, exactly what Tyler was mentioning, it depends a little bit on what information exactly you're collecting and how you're using it. But it's very, very possible if you are just collecting pure event interaction information, that it would not fall within that scope of personal data. So it would be compliant. There's a number of resources also on the Tag Inspector website that might help clear some of those aspects up. Getting back to what the architecture looks like. So we talked about some of those components on the client side, or what's happening and running within the user's machine itself. There's also this new concept of server-side data distribution. So using that single data stream, sending it up to a server endpoint, and then distributing data outside of the browser that you have a little bit more control on. Tyler, do you want to maybe describe how this looks and why, I guess, more importantly, this is becoming more in vogue?
So why it might have a couple reasons, and some of them aren't exactly good, but I'll flesh that out a little bit. So what's happening is now you're kind of shackled on what you can do on the website, and there's only so much you can do with third parties. So people are coming up with ways to send this data both from sort of a mapping perspective and an efficiency perspective. So I'll talk about efficiency first. JavaScript loads on a website. So I know everyone on here might not be engineers, but essentially you can think of it like an image loading. It's not much different. The more images you have, it's going to take up more website bandwidth and have an impact on your page. And typically with marketing tags, they have to load before everything else, sort of like images, but before you paint it, the site's going to look weird. So you have this big impact on page performance. And as SEO is moving more and more relying on faster, more reliable page performance, the more marketing pixels that you have, or the more things that you're relying on, becomes a problem just from a performance perspective. So even not even talking about privacy and that subject, just the performance and having a more efficient site, moving all your tags somewhere else to where you have that single data stream, you can essentially think of all of your tags becoming one tag. You have a single tag that's firing with every event and all the metadata attached to it into some server somewhere else, and it does all the collection for you. So all you have to do is make sure that single tag is working. And that's really the concept from a efficiency standpoint. Also from a privacy standpoint, you now kind of have full control on what you're doing. JavaScript is a mess. It's very cool for us to be using JavaScript in our industry because it's lightweight and you can build a lot of things and consume things very fast, but it's not as explicit and things can sneak in. So if you've ever you hear about these big e-retailers where all of a sudden code sneaks in and they're like, we lost all your credit cards. Sorry, some other company has them all now. So if you shop at Target, cancel your cards. Or if you did, this has happened. We've seen it happen with a lot of companies where basically you've leaked data that you weren't planned on just because JavaScript at the end of the day. It's very explicit in server side. This is the data we're sending, and this is where. This is strongly typed code. It's going to this place. This is exactly where it's going. We don't really have to worry about piggybacking as much anymore. So with those concepts, that makes server side very popular and very cool. We take some of the risk away. Some of the hard concepts are, well, how does our analytics ID work in this platform if it's not reading from a cookie? And that's things that are still getting figured out and being fleshed out. So server side's maybe not finished yet, but it's a thing where the industry is tending towards. One last point, Lucas, and then I promise I'll shut up on this. One big point, I've been talking about how your company brands, how your company thinks about this. So about, when you're collecting data, especially for my friend Dean in Germany that's talking about this, you're very concerned with what are we allowed to collect and GDPR and are we breaking the rules? And when you're thinking about that, you kind of have a responsibility now, because if all you sent was metadata away from the website and now it's on your server where you're distributing data out, they can't see where it's going. They have no idea. Now it's on your server and the client has no concept. It used to be you're sending all this third-party stuff from the website. They can look at the network tab. There's products out there. Tag Inspector has a scanner. There's a plugin that you can just see where you're sending data. We can find out where data is being sent. Now that it's in the cloud, now that it's on the server, it is your responsibility as a company to uphold that, and the customers can't hold you accountable. So while it does create the opportunity to do that, it also creates the opportunity for you to get caught down the line. So you have a responsibility more than ever to conduct yourself in a responsible way, or else that data is going to get found out downstream, and no one was able to hold you accountable here and say you shouldn't be doing this. And once you've kind of been caught doing it, it's too late. So understanding your governance plan, your compliance plan is very, very important in the server side world.
Yep. Yeah, those concepts around being able to modify information so you have cleanliness of data makes it a little bit easier. That ability to better control your data with this type of a setup, it opens up opportunities to streamline integrations, to better use your first-party data, and to be safer with it. So it cuts off some of those security vulnerabilities. But as always, with great power comes great responsibility. Especially within that compliance context, and making sure that you are disclosing properly to users. The last kind of concept here of what the future looks like from a data collection architecture standpoint looks like, and then we'll move on and we'll deep dive. I want to make sure we get through all of our information here, but the concept of a first-party data warehouse. So you owning your information, we've already talked about integrations across different platforms, having all of that in one place, so that you can effectively understand your users, because now it's on you to understand your users. You can't ask other third parties because they no longer have that kind of God level of observation ability with those third-party cookies being gone. So you need to have that intimate understanding of users, and then also those downstream impacts of being able to better comply with those different compliance and regulatory requirements. Made so much easier, as Tyler has mentioned before, due to integration. So having that first-party data warehouse where you can really store everything and then action the information becomes really critical.
We had a question come in, Lucas, and it's in the Q&A, not in the chat. While you're reading that and coming up with an answer, I have a comment I want to make on that question. Your first part of this is how you would, I'll read the whole question so everyone knows what I'm answering. How would you communicate the need for logins and opt-in to consumers, specifically thinking in terms of adoption of unified IDs? While I think Lucas will give a better answer to this holistically, I do have a take on this, which is how would you communicate the need for logins? And specifically where I think the web industry is going to change. So user ID is more valuable than ever. We've been relying on third-party IDs to kind of identify users and figure out what's going on. So a login, forcing people into logins wasn't really that important. Like getting people to go actually log into your website was sort of important, but it was a little bit of an afterthought. One thing that's been it's going to become a lot more important to actually have people log into your website now, because that's going to enrich your first party data set pretty significantly. And so on that concept, one thing that I think has been missing from our industry, I haven't seen a lot of A/B testing and making sure that it's very obvious what you gain out of things and driving people to these specific sorts of interactions, driving people to log in and making it seem more important, this type of thing. Obviously companies do A/B testing, but I haven't seen a lot of iteration over those things and forcing into that. I think you're going to see a rise in that type of UX and how UX is going to drive certain things that are going to enrich the data sets. Because we've been able to augment the heck out of this with third party. Like it didn't matter. We could get ways of fingerprinting people and ways of getting this behavioral data and connecting all of these things. So getting back to that user experience hyper focus of how to drive people to these certain kind of key things to enrich that first party data set is going to significantly rise, because it's going to become important in this new world. Having said that, Lucas, how about a better answer?
Yeah, when asking about communicating the need for logins and opt-in, you know, a lot of what Tyler was talking about is communicating that need internally for like our focus with the website. Communicating the need to consumers really comes down, it is a big part of that UX piece, but it comes down to ask yourself the question, what would you as a consumer take as a fair value exchange in order to do that action. I now see I'm located in our Barcelona office, and so I'm obviously on European websites quite a bit. And the amount of pop-ups and offers that are just pop up because people want me to register for their newsletter or log in to the website, knowing full well being in the industry so that they can associate an ID with me, it's overwhelming. It's terrible user experience. And so what is that value exchange and what is going to be valuable to that user so that it kind of answers its own question. It's not explicitly communicating to you like, hey, I need you to do this so that I can do XYZ. Provide them with XYZ, and kind of customize that experience so that the value outweighs the kind of friction that they're having to go through.
Let me give you a real world example on this really quickly. I know we're running out of time to get through all this content. But I think this is important for us all. We understand what's happening. Everybody that's here gets the marketing world and the privacy world. We get this. I think it's important to understand that Lucas keeps bringing up that customer perspective. That's not us. This is there's a lot of people that don't understand what's happening in this. So quite literally the other day, it's one of our customers. It is an anime streaming site, and I know that they happen to own 2 anime streaming sites. This particular customer, and they were asking for consent to be able to track across multiple websites. And what they were doing is they wanted to understand users moving between those websites. My girlfriend, when asked this consent, freaked out. What do they mean? Are they going to track my banking stuff in other places? What is that? She had no concept. And I was like, they're literally a customer. This is what they're asking you. This is what they're trying to do. And they want to understand your interaction. But had I not been there, that is a user that would not have consented. She was freaked out. That communication, that understanding of what am I giving away? And why do I, as a user, want to do this? Is it going to impact me? Is this going to make the websites better? Is this going to give me offers on multiple websites? Is there a transaction that's happening that I might see deals for other websites, or I might be incentivized for doing this, or am I literally just giving this away for free? What is the point? How does this impact me? And understanding that communication sort of isn't there as an industry, but it's going to become important because if you want to collect that data, you're going to have to create that mechanism that not every user has me sitting next to them telling them what's happened when they go to consent.
Yeah, effective communication becomes certainly critical. And keeping in mind that when you're communicating to the consumer that I want you to log in or register so that I can show you more personalized advertisements, it's not a sufficient value exchange. I don't go to the New York Times website to view the ads. I go, for the content there. So offer something of value to that user for that exchange of their information. All right, so I know we're running shorter on time, but when we've talked about some of those different components of what the future architecture will look like. The 4 key pillars and the 4 key concepts and components of that architecture, we already mentioned it, but the data layer, server-side data distribution, that single data stream, and then those internal data warehouses. So I just want to deep dive a little bit more on some of those concepts and what these things are, just so everyone can understand that need. So the data layer, what it is, it's a central organized object that holds all of the data from any backend system that needs to be sent to your various different third parties that you're using for analytics, advertising, marketing. And it becomes a single point of reference today for any client-side tags, in the future for that data stream that will be providing all of that information. Here's a few kind of examples. First, conceptually, that it sits between that application layer and then the various different third parties that you're sending information to. And then an example of just a very basic high-level data layer as used for GTM in Google Analytics today. Tyler, I know you spent a lot of time and a lot of years organizing these. Any key concepts about the data layer that's really important to keep in mind as we move forward into this future?
I would say maybe not any key concepts as much as to minimalize. You should understand exactly what data you're going to have there, what its purpose is, And you should only have so many. Don't have user ID 4 times. You don't need to redo user ID inside a product array that's down. That have a very simple, you have products that are on the page, you have some user level data that's on the page, organize, minimalize, and have documentation on the structure. The truth is you really just need to understand and never read a piece of data that doesn't come from this, and have a standard way of adding data to this. So you as a company, we need new data in the data layer. What's that process? How do we interface with the devs? How do we keep it organized? How do people know how to read this now in tag management systems down the line? Have a process in line. And if you need help with the process, come talk to InfoTrust. But have a process in line that makes sure this stays standardized, minimalized, organized. Let's keep this thing clean, because it is the cleaner it is, the cleaner the data downstream is going to be, and the easier to integrate with.
Yeah. All right. We also have talked quite a bit about server-side data distribution, and just so that everyone can kind of understand this concept. I know it's newer. It's in vogue. A lot of people are talking about it. But what we're looking at here is just a visual of how things work today. So within the client or within the user's browser, they're accessing a website, and you have on that website the JavaScript of the tag management container, typically, which then houses additional third-party JavaScript for each of the third-party platforms that you're using. So your analytics platform, whatever you're using for media measurement, maybe a social media platform that you're using for conversion tracking or trying to create audiences with. All of those things are running their own scripts on that page in order to aggregate information and then cookie users, identify those users, and send all of that data up to their particular platforms. This then contrasts with the concept that we have been talking about around server-side data distribution, where instead of each of those platforms running scripts on your page, it is just you organizing that information in a clean, organized, and minimized data layer on your page, and then sending that up to your server environment so that you can then control and manage that distribution. So this is just a visualization of that concept, and we talked about some of the benefits and why we see organizations moving to this, but wanted to just make sure everyone understands that concept. Tyler, anything to add about the architectures?
No, it's just the reiterating the fact that especially when we talk about control, one big point to talk about too, and this is something that a lot of people don't realize when you're switching this. So when you see that hit going from the tag manager web container to the customer's cloud, that is what we call in the engineering industry a single point of failure. If that fails, so do all of your tags. So while this is, oh, look at that big arrow. Let's go. Let's go. So that is a single point of failure. So it is very, very important. So we do this with Tag Inspector, but regardless, you need to understand this concept. Validate that tag moving to the cloud. So one of the products that we have within the Tag Inspector team is Tag Inspector Real Time. What it does is it makes sure tags are continuing to flow and go to the place that it's going to with the correct data. And if it doesn't, it'll alert you. You'll understand that that system is broken. And it's very important to do some techniques like that, because if that system were to break, so does everything downstream. Great. Our cloud has validations on if user ID is not there and it doesn't send user ID to these places. Well, what if user ID never comes because no event stream was working? And so you can't validate it without understanding what's happening on your website. So one big important call out is, as you move into these server-side distribution systems, these server-side containers, make sure that you understand the validation of the consumption of those servers, the validations of the data layer being transferred down to this cloud, and make sure that that pipeline is correct, because you now have one place for all your tagging to fail.
Yeah. It's a really good point around single point of failure. It also, though, opens up a lot of opportunity, because you have just single point of maintenance as well. If you just need to keep one thing up and running and clean and consistent, it's a lot easier than having to manage those different data connections. And many of the partners that we're working with, at minimum, are working with 20 to 30 different marketing, advertising, and analytics platforms. So as opposed to having to manage configuration and all of that for each of those, you can manage that one single data stream, ensure consistency, build it on top of that robust data layer like we talked about before, and it makes it a whole lot easier. Then you're able to transform that information, control it, and then distribute it as necessary from your server environment to those different third parties.
I feel like we're playing good cop, bad cop here, Lucas. Ultimately, I should state, I think the industry, at least somewhat, I think we'll see hybrid solutions for an amount of time where people are moving some things over to the cloud and everything's not quite ready to move. But I do think, server side very much can be the future, and it is a good move. I just want to make sure people keep in mind where the checks and balances are and how to do it the right way.
Good. So we talked about those concepts for the single data stream, and then the final piece here around the internal data warehouse. We've hit on all of these: distribution of event data, making sure that you are sending it to your own owned property, not just passing it along to third-party analytics platforms that you're working with, using that as your single source of truth, integrating data from other first-party data sources, back-end CRM systems, internal e-commerce types of systems, so you have one central record for all of your user information. You can run your own first-party proprietary analysis and modeling to get insights that only you have. Again, instead of relying on insights that third parties are providing to everybody, giving you that competitive advantage. And then the ability to have all your information in one central place that you could just take third-party tools and put it on top of. So you can action your own proprietary information and own proprietary insights within those different third-party tools. And within, again, this privacy-focused environment, that safety net that we've always had of third parties being able to bring, in more cases, more data and more insights and more user information, because they're able to tie together actions and behaviors of information across site. Without those cookies and those persistent identifiers, that is gone. So that safety net's no longer there. We only have ourselves and our own first-party data sets to rely on. And this data warehouse and integration is really key for being able to both accomplish those marketing goals as well as realize those efficiencies from the compliance side of things downstream. Cool. So the last thing that I want to touch on here is how to prepare. We've talked about what the future looks like. We've talked about some of those key components. What can we do right now? What can we do today in order to put us in a good position to be able to not only survive, but thrive in this privacy-focused future? So the first thing, we've talked about it quite a bit with the data layer, with that single source of information. And if you are moving everything to that single data stream, you need to make sure that that single data stream contains the needs for all of the platforms that you're using. And so you need to audit and understand what those data needs are from a strategy standpoint, as well as from just the needs standpoint. What is your analytics tool? What are all those teams using? What data do they need? What data does your campaign optimization tool need, or your personalization platform? Start with an audit, understand what platforms are running, what data they need, and do that comprehensively for all third parties that you're working with. And that's an area where Tag Inspector can certainly help. We talked about that need to build out the client-side data object, that data layer, as a core component of that server-side data distribution environment, but it's also a core component and a key best practice for client-side data distribution in the traditional way. Tyler, I think we had done a webinar about 4 years ago on the need for the data layer, and those concepts have only gotten stronger, and that need has only increased.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I couldn't echo that more, especially where where we're going with the concept of server side. If you think about like the concept of a nice tight data layer, and it's going both internally to your tag management systems on website, and it's going externally to your server side, it's still having that be a single point while distributing to two different places is even more important. Let alone just making sure that it's going to server side correctly, or that it's playing things out correctly on your local tag management system. But now the concept of having two different places that you're collecting data, reading them from a central place is even more important. So like it's only gotten stronger as it's gone over time.
Yeah. And even if you never move to a server-side data distribution environment, still being able to organize all your information in one place, it's going to make integrations, which is critical, regardless of the method via which you're collecting data downstream, so much easier, because you're going to have better data consistency. The third thing, we talked about it a little bit with some of what that future architecture looks like, but migrate to an event-based data collection model. So Adobe Analytics already has this. They've been using this type of a model for years. Google Analytics has just introduced the event-based data collection model with GA4, but it's critical for, again, being able to, in a compliant way, still collect a minimum level of interaction data from your websites, regardless of those user consent choices. And it's also a critical kind of fundamental need when doing any kind of that server-side data distribution. It has to be event-based. It's just a better way of organizing the information to be able to unlock more insights from it. The next point here, Tyler had mentioned it a little bit, begin testing server-side data distribution. It is still quite nascent in terms of the different solutions that are out there. There are a number of solutions on the market today. They are engineering heavy for kind of the upkeep, the maintenance. It does move things kind of, the promise of client-side tag management was always, so easy, anybody can do it, which came with its own downfalls. It created tagging as the Wild West, and that's one of the reasons why we have a lot of these compliance and privacy issues, is because the proliferation of platforms and the number of sites that they were introduced on really blew up. But there are different solutions to use. Start doing some of these foundational pieces that allow for you to begin testing these things out, and at least start using them in order to understand what scaling them within your organization would potentially look like, so that you can evaluate, kind of that risk versus reward for your organization and make an informed decision there. Tyler, any call outs about testing these types of data distribution systems today? I know you've worked with them quite a bit.
I would say, even what is the word testing? I don't want to go too far into this because I know we're sort of wrapping up here and there's not a lot of time, but just the concept of, you have a stream of data happening right now. You have a thing. You have this thing that is working, and you have some kind of feedback loop with that. So whether it's Google Analytics, data showing up in Google Analytics, I can see it in the interface. Some way that data is working. Some way you have a way of QAing it. And as you're moving over to this, like kind of server-side distribution to make sure that that's at least working the same way from the outside, you're dropping a pebble in a stream and figuring out where it ends up, right? Then also inside your server-side data, you can run some sort of code, and that really, we've worked with we've looked into a lot, but we've worked with 3 major server-side tag management systems. They all handle validating data differently. So even from within your framework, figuring that out, I don't have any major points, just that you have some concept. And from the 1,000 or 10,000 foot view, let's make sure the system's still working as intended as it moves over. One more big point, because I want people to at least understand this concept. When I was explaining this to a couple of people internally today, I'll use Google Analytics as an example. When Google Analytics moves to server side, you still have to fire one client side tag on some server side containers to set the client ID, because that's stored in a cookie. But with third-party cookies going away, how's that going to work in the future? How is that client ID going to get set and stored? Well, some tag management systems are working on connecting directly to Google's servers and then redirecting that back to a server-side tag manager, never coming back to the website for a cookie. That actually all gets stored somewhere else, and that's how the IDs are working. So those are systems and concepts that you need to start learning and understanding to move into server-side.
For all of this, for integration, for downstream, for optimizing your first-party architecture, that standardization across platforms and integration concept also is really critical. So I know we are at time. Quick summary in terms of everything that we've gone through here today. Privacy-focused future, it's here. It's only going to accelerate in terms of these technical restrictions that are being placed on cookies, on tracking of users. Users are aware of information that is being collected from them, how it's being used, and they're conscious of it. It's becoming a brand decision and a true kind of top of mind buying criteria for users. So making sure that we are respecting their privacy rights and putting those protections in place really necessitates us to modify our strategy and approach to data rely more on our own owned first-party data and that relationship we have with the consumers. And as a result, that architecture is changing. Hopefully, some of these core concepts around that architecture that we've covered today are helpful. Let us know if anything, if you have any questions, kind of as follow-up, more than happy to dig into it. And if you are interested in really deep diving on any of these topics specific for your organization, we do have this privacy-driven marketing workshop that we are offering for organizations as well. So thank you all very, very much for joining us here today. And hopefully we'll see you in the future at some of our next educational events. Thank you.